Hey everyone, how's it going? All right, we just got started with this live stream. Thanks for everyone to joining us for this new venture of ours, with a live stream version of our webinars, I guess, and call it virtual office hours. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Kevin Kim, and we're gonna wait for some folks to start piling in here. So for those of you who don't know who I am, my name is Kevin Kim. I lead Jurassi's corporate and securities team. And so as a corporate and securities attorney, we do a lot of work in corporate formation and corporate management, governance, M&A, but also a lot of securities work. And of course, we do that for the private lending industry. So definitely wanted to have an opportunity to kind of not present on anything specific and just create a venue for folks to join in and ask questions and discuss topics and give feedback and that kind of stuff. So that's why we're having this today. And while we wait for some questions, feel free to type in your questions, either in the chat or the comments. All right. Well, while we wait for that, we can probably start talking about just kind of current market trends and stuff like that, because private lenders, right now the industry is kind of funky, is the best way to put it, right? Are we not in a recession? Depends on how you define the word recession, I guess, right? But the industry has definitely had some dislocation and had some stress, and so we should probably definitely talk about. We definitely should talk about kind of like current industry trends as it pertains to, I guess, my clientele and the industry at large. So most of my clients are definitely going to be on the balance sheet lender side. Because we form funds. But also, we have a lot of clients that have adopted kind of a hybrid model. They have a fund, they may have a REIT, but they also sell loans to the aggregators or the institutions. And so those things are all part and parcel with kind of the state of the industry. And we're seeing a little bit of a repeat from 2020 during the stress test that we had from March till August of 2020 because of COVID. And we got our first question. All right. Well, I'm about to answer that question, Brian. All right. So, and so with that in mind, when the market is really reliant on secondary market and not balance sheet, things get a little bit chaotic. And with combine that with the rising rate environment in general, it's actually producing interesting results for those lenders who have a balance sheet, who have a line of credit, who have a fund, who have discretionary capital, and they're seeing some success. They're seeing some growth, and they're seeing interesting opportunities come their way to even buy loans. So in general, we have seen a pretty consistent performance for most people who are fund managers, who are balance sheet lenders, who have, I guess, control over their capital, and deal flow is consistently coming. Most fund managers, most balance sheet lenders are very reliant on repeat lenders, and they also have a very good marketing program to bring in deal flow, and that's always been very productive for them. But on the capital side as well, the returns are, surprisingly doing just fine, because their bank lines are still not that expensive, comparatively speaking, and the loan rates are coming up. And so, because they're not reliant or dependent on bond rates, and they're not reliant or dependent on, I guess you can say, Fed rate, their cost of capital is determined by their investors. And so performance is actually kind of trending either kind of status quo or even a little bit up, because rates are climbing as well. Arbitrage will kind of stay static, because the rate on the credit lines will also increase. SOFR has gone up, prime has gone up naturally when Fed rate goes up. And so to that degree, not too much of a disruption when it comes to fund managers and funds in general, primarily because they really call their own shots, right? They're able to make their own decisions and not be subject to another capital source beyond their investors. But at the same time, what's interesting is they're finding themselves in an interesting opportunity. Now they're trying to figure out how they should be pricing, and a lot of them are contemplating or have already done so, increasing their rates um, because of the current market environment and the impact it may have on the underlying collateral. And so it's a very interesting time right now on the operations and the current status of funds. Um, Granted, you have capital constraints, but you always have capital constraints. From an investor perspective, we have seen some interesting reactions to the market. Some You're always going to have investors who kind of are like, like, I guess, the nervous, frantic type investors that are always going to be freaking out. But what's really interesting about these assets from an investor's perspective is they're not as volatile, right? So you could be a fixed income investor or an income investor investing in um, some of these higher yielding income investments out in the market that compete or do better than debt funds do. But the problem with that is just the swings, right? Can you manage the swings, because they're pretty volatile, and so that's where a lot of our clients have won the battle when it comes to convincing their investors or new investors to come on board. And right now, the growth investments have become a lot less attractive because of possibilities of devaluation of real estate investments. But these loans have a cushion because of the LTV, so these debt funds are becoming quite interesting from a investor's perspective. We're seeing a lot of interest both domestically and from overseas, and our sponsors will likely hear from that themselves. Because if our bond markets are in this state, other countries are likely facing much more difficult times. But all arrows point toward positive things for people who have their own balance sheet, lenders who have their own operations and their own captive capital. Um, at the same time, what's also interesting is people gearing up for um, kind of opportunities that will come. Unlike COVID, um, with a raising interest rate environment that's not going to go anywhere anytime soon, the impact to the market may actually be pretty significant. So we don't know whether there may be an uptick in foreclosure. We're starting to see it ourselves at the law firm, and so likelihood is going to be, if you're able to raise the capital for such a vehicle, an opportunity strategy may make sense. When I say opportunity strategy, um, that is in line with maybe buying some distressed notes or some performing notes that need to be offloaded for liquidity's sake at a slight discount or even at par, um, purchasing distressed real estate and so on and so forth. Not quite saying, vulture or an NPL strategy, but an opportunistic strategy is a little bit more open minded, may be in the cards. And I would start considering it if you have investors that are interested. A few of our clients have already executed on that, already have strategies in place for that. And if you're able to raise the capital, what's going to be interesting is there are going to be needs by other lenders for liquidity. And so that may be an opportunity to acquire performing loans at par or at a tiny little discount or something like that, and feed the capital needs as well. So I would suggest, for those of you who have experience in that sector, start thinking about uh, preparing for some type of opportunistic strategy. There's going to be some things come your way that may warrant, having the capital ready to deploy, and also maybe, I guess, expanding the existing parameters of your fund to be a little bit more flexible and be a little bit more opportunistic to some degree as well, because it's highly likely that with the high popularity of construction lending over the past few years, there's going to be a likelihood that some of those loans go into foreclosure or default or are unable to perform, or they're just priced too low and the people that own them can't keep up with the loan. And so that's definitely a possibility, and it's worth preparing for because the opportunities are there for uh, what I would consider a higher yield investment. So yeah, definitely think that it's a good time to be, I would consider it, a balance sheet lender or a fund manager. A lot of the high volume lenders out there are really relying on their balance sheet and their credit lines and other sources. I'm not saying that secondary market is completely dried up. It's still there, just in a different shape and form. I encourage those of you who are still interested in pursuing that or still have a need for that, to really, you know, dig down or drill down with the secondary market player that you're working with, because it is a little bit of a moving target, and that's where things can be quite, I guess, uncertain for you, and uncertainty, breeds, negative emotions if there are unclear expectations. And my perspective on that, it's a two-way street, and so you want to make sure. Granted, they may not tell you the truth or they may not tell you the full story, but it's incumbent upon you to drill down on that as well to make sure that you're not being surprised by something to the best degree possible. But it seems as if that the secondary market is back to some degree. Prices are higher, credit is tightened, and I guess performance of the seller, performance of the loan originator is a much more material topic, but definitely worth considering. Um, yeah, so that's kind of the current state, when it comes to funds. I would say another thing with funds right now is, we're starting to see more activity from, I would call it, smaller lenders who are, they had it in their mind to stand one up, and during 2020 and 2021, and then now they're getting around to it. I think that's a really good idea. You're going to have a greater demand as the secondary market is unable to keep up with demand. And that's another point to make, is demand is still pretty high, it seems. And it's just a matter of who can execute. And we can't forget about the amount of inventory we have available to us. And so there's definitely a high demand for these assets. Um, So yeah, hopefully that answers your question, Brian. I encourage the rest of our listeners to chime in and ask any question they want. The theme of this, I guess, virtual event is office hours. So you can ask about any topic you'd like, and hopefully I can answer it, um, or I can just listen to me ramble on. All right, guys. Well, I mean, it sounds like Brian has had the first question. I hope it's not the last. Uh, If there are no other questions, one of the things that we get common questions on, I guess we can bring that up, is, um, what are kind of the market strategies or structures that have they changed at all, and that kind of stuff. And the only thing that's continuing as a trend is definitely the REIT strategy. It's very popular. The tax deduction is massively important to sponsors and fund managers because uh, you really need to be able to be competitive. And there you go. Okay, another question here. So what are all the components of starting a fund? That's a good question, Rafael. Thank you very much. There's a lot of components to starting a fund, and the first component, I guess, when I say fund, is a general concept, but in private lending, you know the most important thing is you have to be a lender, or at least have a lending business and pursuing one, and have to have deal flow, of course. But one thing that's kind of commonly overlooked is you have to have the ability to raise money, because a fund requires you to go out there and sell, LP interests or LLC interests to high net worth investors, family offices, and the like. And so we always remind clients that the onus is going to be on them. This is not some type of, create it and they will come. You have to work at it. You have to go out there and raise the money. So definitely have the ability to raise the money, have the resources to raise the money, have the network to raise the money. And then the next big thing is going to making sure that you have an idea of what you want to return to them. And you have to really look at your loan tape and loan performance. And when that all that kind of stuff is kind of, that it makes sense, and you need this to increase your efficiency. That's what usually the reason for it is, right? You need reliable capital, but you also need efficiency. And so once you have that solved, then you contact someone like me to kind of walk you through both strategy and structuring and preparation of the necessary documents, and so on and so forth. Okay, another question follow up here is: do you need a CFL or can you use a DRE? You can use both. Either or work just fine. The DRE license is a very robust license. You can use it to broker loans to the public, and as long as they're California loans. And so you can broker them to the fund, if you will, and use that. DRE comes with certain restrictions that may not be ideal to you. For example, the DRE has a construction loan limit at $2.5 million. So it's really up to you if that makes a difference or not. But most clients for a long time just use their DRE, and then eventually what will happen is you'll want the efficiency of the CFL license and don't need as much robust capability, and you're just going to lend out of the fund. So CFL for the fund makes sense. Um, Both licenses allow you to originate loans in California and land in California, and the DRE is a little more robust. It allows you to freely broker and sell loans, um, but it comes with a lot more restrictions and reporting and a much more aggressive regulator. The DRE license is also harder to get. The CFL license is a lot easier to get. So depending on what your current situation is, um, that'll inform your decision as to which way you go. I would say in the long grand scheme of things, most of my clients start with a DRE because it's just what they have. They'll eventually get a CFL license for their fund because it's just easier to operate with, less reporting, less restrictions, one report a year, and all they want to do is lend out of the fund. So it's pretty straightforward. So it's perfect for that. I hope that answers your question, Rafael. There's other things to think about when you're going about thinking about a fund. And one of the motivations to start one is really to have control over your lending business when it comes to what loans you're going to fund, but how fast you're going to fund them. And that's really important to think about because, while on its face, the secondary market makes it very easy to sell, fund and sell loans. It's a kind of an inconsistent approach, and I don't fault them for it. Really, if you think about it, they have to serve their investors, and they have to do the right thing by their investors. And so their investors are a lot more fickle than high net worths are, and they have very stringent guidelines, and that transfers over to us. And so while it's not necessarily the worst thing in the world, it can cause disruption to your business. So definitely think about fund to balance all that out. All right, another question from Rafael. Thanks, Rafael. What's a typical cost to manage a fund? I mean, managing a fund, it can be. It depends on the sponsor. We've had clients do it with a skeleton crew, people, one man team with a couple staff, you know, and they outsource everything, and that's definitely on the table. Um, I wouldn't consider it a part-time gig. It's definitely something. It's a business that you own and manage. In that circumstance, the costs are going to be, just you have your legal costs to form, and then you have your legal costs to maintain. You have your costs associated with your taxes. You have your costs associated with marketing. I would say, clients typically expend about, we always tell clients to, kind of project about half a point to a point ish for expenses for the fund. Um, And then the fund manager has its operational costs, rent, computers, employees, so on and so forth. So, it's really hard to project. I haven't seen a consistent number. Some clients have a very large staff and they have multiple verticals to their business. Other clients keep it really lean and mean and they have two staff members and it's just them or them and a partner. And so there's no hard number I can give you, but I tell you, if you'd really like to kind of plan that out, we can do that with you. Uh, you clarify compliance, accounting, things of that nature. Yeah, I mean compliance. You can probably expect legal compliance at least. You can probably expect to spend about anywhere between $10,000 and $20,000 a year. Um, accounting. Every CPA is different, so you have tax preparation. If you choose to get audited financials, those cost extra. Clients who get audited financials, I would say they probably spend upwards of 30 a year for audited financials and tax preparation, just back office accounting and all that kind of stuff. K1 preparation. Um, and then you have a lot of things about third party vendors. All right, Matt asked a good question. Hey, Matt, what can you expense to the fund and what should you not expense to the fund? That's a really good question, actually. So, what you should not expense to the fund, then these are kind of best practices. There are better rules and there are gap rules about this too. Best practices, I would say. First thing is definitely not your rent. Don't do that. Not your computers, not your equipment. Generally, usually not your payroll. Um, but one of the common things that a lot of funds for the fund is if the fund is the primary means of the lending business and the means of funding the loans, it can share or take on the marketing expenses for the origination business. Um, the fund should definitely be paying for its own legal expenses. The fund should also be paying for accounting expenses and tax expenses. And there are a lot of different minor expenses that come up, but those are kind of the big ones. And then one of the things that we have been asked in the past is how do you deal with, like, for example, if the manager gets sued? And that's what's important about the documents. A lot of our documents, we ensure we have this indemnification provision where unless the manager is held to a very high standard of gross negligence or fraud or something like that, the fund is obligated to indemnify the manager when it comes to legal costs. So not an expense, but there's an indemnification that happens there. All right, another question here from James. Hey, James, you're not climbing a mountain today? For fundraising, we were to use an outsourced fundraiser. Can we pay them a referral? Oh, this is a very good question. So in the fund world, we're dealing with securities, and so uh, paying people for raising capital is a very sensitive topic. Since Dodd-Frank, these rules have changed significantly. So generally, I tell people you cannot pay third parties transaction-based compensation for raising capital, and the SEC has said that is tantamount to being a broker dealer. Granted, there is guidance to how to pay finder's fees in the right circumstances. There is ways to do it at the state level as well. And then if they happen to be a registered investment advisor, they can charge a fee themselves. They usually charge a fee to their investors anyway. And then if they're a broker dealer, definitely. They're a licensed broker dealer, definitely. And that doesn't just necessarily mean like, oh, hey, Jim has got a Series 7. That doesn't mean anything to me. Jim's Series 7 must be hanging with an actual brokerage agency, a brokerage house, and they need to be transacting, right? And they need to be an actual licensed broker dealer and all those fun things. You can't just have someone who has a Series 7 unless they have an independent brokerage house themselves. So yeah, definitely they need a license if they want to raise money on your behalf. But once again, there are ways to do it correctly. Outside of the mortgage realm, in the real estate realm, there are actually, in California at least, there are some unique exceptions for real estate brokers, and I think that's kind of commonly true across the country based on the different states. But when it comes to securities in general, we tell clients, really be careful about how you do this because it can get you into a lot of hot water because the penalties for this kind of stuff, unlicensed broker dealer activity, could result in full disgorgement, meaning that the money has to go back to the investor, all earned income has to go back to the investor, fees, whatever. And so it can be really dangerous. And then also don't forget about the headache and legal fees to defend the subpoena or accusations or examination coming from the state or federal government. So it can be quite challenging, but it's not the end of the world. One of the things that we recommend in this world is talking to investment advisors, because investment advisors are a really great resource because they are looking for fixed income investment opportunities for their high net worth investors. And their usual go-to is annuities, and annuities suck. And so these are really great alternatives to fixed income. And so, it can be really popular with RIAs who understand the industry, and sometimes they need a little bit of education. And RIAs, they're going to charge a fee to their investors, so they're going to have their asset management fee. They pay, charge a 1% or 2% fee to their investors. If they reach their hand out to you as a sponsor saying, "Hey, I want you to pay me," that's kind of a flag, not a red flag, but a flag to consult with your securities attorney, make sure that he consults with his compliance team. And all the RIAs do have a compliance team. And make sure that it's done compliantly, because it can be done. There are certain wrap fees and certain structures that can be done, but in the wrong circumstances, not only can the RIA get in trouble, but you as the target sponsor could get in trouble as well. So it's definitely something worth exploring if the opportunity presents itself. We've a lot of clients that have done immensely well with registered investment advisor platforms across the U.S., and there are several that love this space. They think it's a great fixed income product, and they do quite well with it. Hey, Mitch, thanks for asking the question. I was reading some comments from NASA about REITs that may lower the investor's income and net worth requirements. So this is different. So a lot of people kind of conflate the fact that REITs and securities exemptions, and they think that if you're a REIT, then all of a sudden that you're public, right? And you're public registered. It's definitely not the case. Being a REIT is just I guess you could call it a tax filing, right? There are tax rules. It's all it really is. But in certain circumstances, if you were to be, for example, if you were to raise a REIT doing a Reg A offering, then you could raise money from non-accredited investors, because Reg A allows that, right? So Reg A allows, at least under Tier 2, allows you to raise $75 million from as many accredited and non-accredited investors as you'd like, subject to the 12G limits of 2000 under the 34 Act. And you can advertise as well. And so that would probably be the most common way to do it, or take it public. And that there's no limits there, right? You can raise money from whoever you want. I would suggest really thinking through a Reg A or a public, because the more public your offering is, the more oversight the government has over your offering, meaning a lot more reporting, examination, and red tape. And so there are a lot more restrictions. And with Reg A in and of itself, it's basically a public offering. So there are a lot of limitations. Namely, one of them is if you have to file for a requalification under certain circumstances, you have to wait. You can't just stop offering the securities. So I'm a fan of staying private for our space, because the asset class is so in tune with high net worth investors anyway. And the ticket size of the transactions do require pretty high investment amounts. It's very hard to transact in our space when your investor are investing, $1,000, $5,000, $10,000 at a time, when the transaction size on average is around $300,000 to $500,000. But it's definitely on the table. And bringing up REITs, one of the most interesting things about REITs, we just did a webinar on this recently, so you can look for that on YouTube. Is the tax benefits, and that's the primary reason to do it. I would say right now, at least, REIT dividends grant the investor a 20% pass-through deduction on their distributions, and in debt funds, we're distributing ordinary income, and so that's the most, I guess, most common objection that we find in our sector. That is great. You think about it, the simple math is, if you have a $10,000 distribution, the investor is paying tax on $8,000 of it. You really can't get closer to capital gains rate than that in our space. So that is the primary motivating factor. And just full disclosure, that benefit is currently set to sunset in 2025 as part of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act from the Trump administration. It's unknown as to whether that tax bill will be extended or made permanent. There's been talk of that. If the Republicans take Congress, they have talked about that. But there seems to be a lot of other issues going on with our government. So who knows whether we'll see that in 2025 or not. But if they do, then you'll see a lot more funds start or convert to REITs as well. I'm hoping for it, because I think it's a great boon to our industry, and it attracts more investors to the industry, and really raises awareness to people who don't know about our industry. And that seems to be the biggest challenge in raising money, right? We have a lot of clients that always kind of ask me about, like, Kevin, I'm talking to these people and they don't really understand what we do. And of course they don't understand what we do, right? Especially if they're high net worth investors, or if they're investment advisors. when when they hear private lending, then they're gonna have a big question mark on their head. They is it mortgage? Is it conventional? Is it homes? What they won't, they're gonna have confusion. Granted, our space has definitely expanded significantly and it's become quite the darling of Wall Street. But you'd be surprised of how little awareness of the industry is at large when it comes to investors. And once they discover it, they fall in love with it because you know where else are you going to find 8% plus returns in a situation where your assets are tied to first position mortgages on short term assets. It's very very hard to find out there, and so I think the hardest part is going to be for those of you who are having struggles raising capital is explaining to folks what the industry is all about and all the benefits of it, and all the pros of it. And you can address the cons as well, but I think really the pros outweigh the cons in our space. Um, and you see clients who are now clients of ours who are now in several hundred million or even half a billion under management, and they're doing quite well for their investors, and their investors are quite happy. And they just can't, they have to keep them away because they can't fill the obligation. So I really believe that it's a matter of awareness, and it's incumbent upon all of us to educate our investors and our friends about the space and really explain to them why it's so attractive and using the right terminology, right? And granted, they may be able to find, I had a conversation with an investor the other day. He's like, "Yeah, I can do 9.75 on this high yield index fund over here." I'm like, "Yeah, that's great, that's fantastic. You can do that, but are you going to be doing that every month, every quarter? Are you doing that every year? How long? Until those things adjust." And the reason for it adjusting and reason for it changing is not anything tangible. It's really kind of market sentiment, right? It's how are we feeling today? And so that's one of the things that I really love about the space. There's tangible reasons for any, rate climb or rate sink. So, all right. Well, hopefully that addressed that issue and that question. I'm loving the engagement, guys, and feel free to ask more questions about any topic you like. We're gonna keep it going for a little longer, and then close it out. But uh, once again, one of the things that I encourage all of you guys is, we have a pretty open door policy, and if you've got questions or you want to consult on something, feel free to email me. My email is pretty easy. It's k.kim@jurassiellp.com, and happy to talk to you about any issue if I can help. And then another thing that I want to put out there for you guys, and this is a little bit of a selfish promotion, is we've got an upcoming conference. And for those of you who've been to our conferences, you know how fun they can be and how productive they can be. The upcoming Captivate conference is going to be in a few weeks on August 21st to the 23rd. And it's going to be in Las Vegas at the Encore Hotel. And we're scheduled to break records with our attendance again. We're projecting over 400 people. I think right now we're well over that. So it's going to be a good time. It's going to be at a new hotel. So encourage all of you to come out. If anything, just to come say hi to the team and have a drink. And drinks are on me. And then and really listen in to a lot of market leaders and share intel and learn new things from your colleagues and competitors in the space. So if you're interested, you can learn more at Jurassic.com, JurassiCon.com, GERACICON.com/Captivate to register. And if you want to attend any other conferences, please make sure to check that out or add yourself to the mailing list because we have 2 a year. And also, if you're interested in fund formation, you want to learn more, I would encourage all of you, if you haven't already, take the AAPL's Certified Fund Manager course. I teach it. It's online. It's an online course at your own pace. It requires 2 things. One, you have to be a member of AAPL. And number 2, I think it's like a $300 fee. And that's the first level course for fund management. And then I teach the advanced level course live at the Las Vegas event. I think this year it's in October. And that's the advanced level course. We talk about REITs, we talk about ERISA, we talk about fund structures, we talk about all the fun stuff about advanced level fund management. So definitely check that out as well. It's a great resource for lenders. If you've ever taken the first class with me years ago, the advanced level course is definitely a worthwhile endeavor because you can learn a ton about advanced level topics. And this year we're going to be roping in some tax people and some administrators, so hopefully it'll be more productive. All right. I don't think I have anything else. I don't have any other plugs. So I think we're gonna call it that. It's been a fun time. Hopefully we'll see you guys at the upcoming conferences this year. And then once again, if you have any other questions or ideas or want to run something by me, feel free to email me or call, and we'll definitely get time on the calendar.